Well, it's been 6 months since the October 7 attacks by Hamas in Israel, which sparked the Israel-Gaza war. And in that time, here in Australia, we've seen regular protest marches, both from Israeli and Jewish groups, calling for the hostages to be released. We've also seen pro-Palestinian groups calling for an end to the Israeli military's assault on Gaza.
Next hour, we'll be speaking to Nasser Mashni, from the president of the Australian Palestine Advocacy Network. But now we are joined by Jeremy Liebler, the president of the Zionist Federation of Australia. Jeremy Liebler, welcome to Weekend Breakfast. Thanks months on from the October 7th attacks, and obviously we are talking about a very broad and diverse range of people here, but how is your community in Australia reflecting on what happened on that day and what has happened since?
I think with a deep despair at the fact that there are still over 130 hostages being held in Gaza under horrific circumstances. At this very time, 6 months ago, it was at this time in the morning, around 7 a.m. or 6:30 a.m, that hundreds of young people were at a dance party when Hamas invaded Israel on paragliders, by car, by sea, and proceeded just at that Nova Music Festival alone to murder over 300 people, to rape women, and to then take many back into Gaza as hostages. So there's a huge amount of deep despair at what continues to go on, and a sense sometimes that the hostages have been forgotten. There's also immense despair at the suffering that is ongoing in Gaza by innocent Palestinians who are suffering as a result of Hamas's decision to launch this war, as well as the 500,000 people in Israel who continue to be displaced from their homes. They can't go back in the south and they can't go in the north. We are living through a very difficult period.
Can you give us a sense of the public mood of the community in Israel and here towards those Israeli hostages and their families?
It's deeply personal. You know, Israel is a country of 9 million people. Everyone knows everyone. I was in Israel in November last year, so about 6 weeks after the 7th of October. The first thing you see, which is still today when you arrive at the airport, are pictures of every single hostage, their name and their age, in the arrivals hall. It is everywhere. There is not an Israeli that has not been directly impacted by what has taken place.
There has been so much suffering in Gaza since October 7th, as you speak about before, your deep despair. How do you reconcile the actions that have been taken by Israel that have led to so many deaths there? And do you feel as though the response has been proportionate?
There is no inconsistency between feeling empathy, despair, and care for innocent people affected by war, which unfortunately happens in every single war, and yet believing in and supporting in the justice of Israel's need to remove Hamas from power. Let's not forget that in addition to the 130 hostages that are still being held in Gaza, Hamas started this war. Israel did not want this war and does not want this war. But Israel has to defend its citizens. Hamas has sworn to commit another 7th of October, and another one, and another one. And so if Israel doesn't remove Hamas and prevent Hamas from being able to operate and control the Gaza Strip, it simply is going to exposing its own citizens to another terrorist attack. But this is actually this is not just about Israel. And I think we need to be very clear about this. If we set a precedent now that a terrorist organisation can take hundreds of civilians as hostages, can rape them in captivity, and simply have immunity because they embed themselves among civilian populations, well, then we are signing a death warrant for their entire Western world. There will be a sign up saying we are closed for business, because this is the tactic that every terrorist organisation will now deploy against the West, here in Australia, in the United States, United Kingdom, and throughout Europe. So this is far bigger than just about Israel.
And there was no doubt strong condemnation and a strong international reaction at the time of those attacks on October 7th. Has Israel somewhat squandered the public sympathy that might have been felt towards it at the time as a result of their actions since?
I think that Israel is fighting two wars. It's fighting a war in Gaza, and it's fighting a propaganda war from Hamas. And so is there now a lot of pressure on Israel after 6 months of war? Yes, there is. Is it important that Israel has very serious regard to the humanitarian impact of the war? Yes, they should, and I believe that they are. Do they always get it right? No, they don't. Just like any army, just like the Australian Army in Afghanistan, just like the US Army, they don't always get it right. I'm sure everyone will recall the horrific incident when the United States in Afghanistan, not once, but twice, accidentally bombed an Afghani wedding where over 60 innocent people were murdered. That is a horrific tragedy, as was the death of 7 aid workers just recently in Gaza, a horrific, horrific tragedy. But no one called into question the justice of the war as a result, and nor should they in this case.
Since the October 7th attacks, how united is the Israeli community here in Australia on how things have played out in Gaza?
Well, I'd describe it more broadly. The Jewish community here in Australia overwhelmingly supports Israel's right to defend itself and to remove Hamas from power, as does both the Australian government and the opposition, as does the US administration. In Israel is a robust democracy. Before the 7th of October, there were mass protests in the streets over proposed reforms that the Israeli government were pushing forward with. And now what's evolved in Israel, on the streets of Israel, is an enormous conflict between this innate desire and need to bring back the hostages, but also to finish the war with Hamas. And I think Israeli society, understandably, is going through this internal struggle as we speak. I'm not sure there's any silver bullet or answer to this horrible, horrible moral dilemma that Hamas has put Israel in on the 7th of October.
Jeremy Liebler, the President of the Zionist Federation of Australia, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.